Hi all, welcome back. Happy Friday. It's April 3rd, and we are ending our week on talking about governance as a solution to environmental problems. So last time I talked a little bit about, and you read a little bit about some sort of federal, in the United States, federal environmental legislation that's happened over the last 40 years or so. And this time I want to talk about a little different thought about governance, and that's called participatory governance, or sometimes called green democracy. So here's the first thought. The federal laws that we talked about last time are very much a top-down hierarchical sort of approach. So what we mean by that is kind of from the business world, a hierarchy that's top-down means that the head boss tells the bosses beneath she or he what to do, and then that trickles down to the actual employees that do the work. The bottom-up approach might be a little different in that the employees might be able to get together and come up with some ideas about what needs to be done. And maybe they could convey those ideas to their bosses and it would move on up the chain and they could help set the policy. So federal environmental law is very much a top-down approach in this country and in most countries. And the first question I pose here is that this approach necessary? In other words, do we need to have overarching federal laws? And I think the answer to that is yes, for reasons that I talked about last time, and that is voluntary compliance. In other words, expecting people to do the right thing just for the common good doesn't always work very well because we are humans and we tend to look out for our individual needs, even if that might encroach upon others. So mutual coercion that has central authority checking on it is, I think, a good thing. Is it the only approach that needs to be done? Absolutely not. I think there are a lot of other approaches out there and that could really help us advance this idea of environmental governance. Here's another picture of the top-down, bottom-up idea that might get a little bit more at some environmental perspectives. So the top-down idea might be a policy is set by some central authority, like a political party or a president or a Congress, and then that trickles down to agencies or Congress who sets the laws, and then agencies who have to interpret the laws, and courts that have to judge the laws, and then actually people that have to comply with the laws at the bottom. The bottom-up approach would take input from the economic environment, the natural environment, the technological environment, the social environment. The people that are existing in all these different realms could participate in forming the policy, and then that could inform the structure above them. Does this ever happen? Well, in the reading that you did for this, it talked about 3 different ways that it kind of happens around the world. One is international treaties. So really, since about the 1970s, nations have gotten together on various occasions, most of the nations of the world, to try to come up with environmental treaties, to try to solve a big overarching problem that none of them can solve on their own. And there have been some success stories here. So one's called CITES, Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species. In 1975, this was passed and enacted. And it essentially has given some teeth to customs agents and nations at border crossings to not allow nation-to-nation trade in species that are endangered. So if you've ever flown internationally and gone through customs, you know that they ask you questions and check your luggage and things like that. Part of what they're looking for is smuggling of endangered species. So if you're trying to smuggle parrots from South America into North America to maybe sell them on the black market, that would be something that people sometimes try to do and sometimes get away with. But this treaty has said, hey, nations are going to band together to try to prevent this. So it hasn't stopped the problem, but it has sort of helped. And it wasn't some central authority coming and saying this needs to happen. It was a bunch of participatory nations coming together to say we need to solve this problem. The Montreal Protocol is similar. This in the 1980s was a international convention that came together to ban chlorofluorocarbons. That's the chemical that was and still is in some ways destroying our ozone layer. That problem has not quite been solved, but it's been really lessened because of this treaty. So that was a successful one. We've had a number of these other global conventions that have not been quite as successful. The Kyoto Protocol that tried to curtail climate change, not very successful. And then our recent conventions on climate change have had some nations buy into it. The Paris Climate Convention is one of the more recent ones. And unfortunately, the United States recently backed out of their commitments on the Paris Climate Convention. So the thing about participatory governance is it needs all people to buy in and to abide by whatever the decision is. And if that doesn't happen, then it doesn't work very well. There are some examples of participatory governance in the private sector for environmental things. So one example is the Forest Stewardship Council that has come up with a sustainable forest certification. So this is an international organization. It's not affiliated with any government. And it's come up with a way that foresters, people that are harvesting timber and selling it worldwide, can label their products as being certified sustainable. So they're harvesting in a sustainable way. They're not destroying cultures. They're hopefully not destroying ecosystems. And they can certify and sometimes even sell their product for a little bit more. Another one that you've probably heard of is fair trade coffee or fair trade chocolate. This again is a private organization, the Fair Trade International Organization, that has come together with some regulations on what does that mean to be fair trade certified, and so that companies can certify that their product is fair trade compatible and sell it like that, and they are adhering to regulations that they've all agreed upon. So there was no central government saying this had to happen. This happened on its own, kind of in a participatory way. The final example that's from the reading is called multi-level governance. It's kind of a fairly new idea. The best example, I think, in the world is the European Union, which doesn't always work well, but in some ways is doing this better than anyone else in the world. So this is attempting to say not everything needs to come from a head of a nation and be broadcast to those subjects below it. Some things can happen at the many nation level, so supranational, like the EU, European Union institutions all coming together and making decisions. Some things make sense to happen at each individual nation, like interstate education or something like that, how education might happen within each nation. And then some things happen at the sub-state level, but they reach across different nations, like maybe transportation networks within Europe. Those could be governed at levels that are more localized, but of course also reach beyond the borders of one nation into others. So this is kind of interesting, and it's sort of trying to network and link the lower levels of government to the regional levels of government to the national and even supranational levels of government. And in that respect, it would involve a lot more participation than just a simple top-down model. So the key concept to all of these is participation. Who gets to participate? Are they willing to participate? Are they willing to adhere to whatever decision is made? And that means you have to identify who the stakeholders are. So that's an important word here, stakeholders. Who are the people or groups or organizations that should be involved in this decision and would have to adhere to it, and who hasn't maybe traditionally been involved, and how to get them to the table. So this could involve a lot of people, residents of an area, people that work in a particular sector, children, maybe elderly people, as well as those of working age, different organizations, nonprofit organizations and for-profit organizations, businesses, corporations, and then of course governments as well. So the idea would be that all of these different groups would have some sort of seat at the table and help to decide whatever the policy should be, not have the policy come from on high. If you could imagine, probably you can already see that there might be some problems with this. Let's take AEP as an example, American Electric Power, who runs that coal-burning power plant that we went to a long time ago before all this craziness happened. Imagine that it wasn't just AEP running that power plant, but there was a committee of all of these people that are on my list here that had a seat at the table. So you and I could have a seat at the table and say, you know what, Earl, I don't think you should be burning coal anymore because coal is a very dirty fuel. I think you should switch to some other fuel. And everyone else could have their say too, and then eventually there'd be a vote on how the electricity is produced. That there would be some problems with that, right? Because businesses, organizations that are trying to employ people and trying to make a product or perform a service or do something to advance their cause would have to listen to and maybe change the way they do things based on input. And not every organization would welcome that sort of input. Also, there are questions about who gets input and how far would we extend that. So for example, what about non-human representation? Now, of course, we can't wait for the trees to speak for themselves because they can't. But should they have representation? Should there be representation for forests and coral reefs and oceans and things like that? We've talked about that before and some of the problems with it. How about future generations? Your great-great-grandchildren. I know that's a scary thought, but it could happen someday, right? Should someone be representing their thoughts? And how would we even know what their thoughts are? That's a difficult question. How about other nations or regions? So should Mexico have a seat at the AEP table to be able to say, hey, AEP, what you are doing is harming us in some way. You shouldn't be burning coal because that's adding carbon dioxide to the atmosphere and that's changing the climate. That would open it up to the whole world that would really have a say on what every little business could do. That might be difficult. And then would all get equal votes. If I'm sitting at that AEP table just as a citizen of Ohio, should I have an equal vote as someone who's running that company? So this is contrary to a lot of what we do in this country, and it's sort of a novel thought. It's also one that would require lots of people to get involved. And another mini issue or major issue with this is it might be difficult to get people involved in all these things. We can't even really get people to vote in this country. We get 50% voter turnout in some of our elections, and that might mean half the people aren't really even motivated enough to vote. Would they really weigh in and thoughtfully participate in deliberations on how different companies and organizations should do their work? I don't know. That's a difficult question. Okay, so we'll make this short today because I want you to participate a little bit. If we were all together, we would do this in class, but alas, we are not. So there's a cool website called Participedia that is really all about participatory governance examples from all over the world. It's another one of these interactive websites. And I'm going to put you in a group, and I'm going to want you to search for one of these dots on this map. I'll tell you which one. And I just want you to read a little bit about that and learn a little bit about who is participating and what are they trying to do and how it might work and how it might encounter difficulties. Okay, so your job is to visit the Participedia website. It's participedia.net, I think, and search for your group topic, which is shown below here. So there are 5 of these. One's called East of England, one's called Japan Energy and Environment, Guardians, not Guardians of the Galaxy, Guardians of the Riachuelo, Gada General Assembly, and Ethiopian Karo Management System. I tried to pick some from around the world. So you can see your name, see which group you're in. You don't really have to interact with each other. We're going to do this as a Google form. So I will post a Google form on Notebowl Bulletin. And what I'd like you to do is to read about, go to Participedia, type in at the search bar at the top, type in East of England, for example, if you're in that group, and then it pops up a short article that you can read about who is this group, what are they trying to do, and how are they trying to make it work. And on this Google form that I put together, I've posted 4 different questions. Who are the stakeholders? What is the objective? What are they trying to do? What are some advantages to this process that they're trying to do? And what do you see as might be some drawbacks to this process? All of these you could answer in sort of a one-liner or a sentence or two. So I've set up the Google Sheet for you to do that. We're going to do this on a first-come, first-served basis. So if you're in the East of England group, for example, you can go find that and read about it, and then you can choose whichever one of these is still open. If you're a little late to the process, you might see that 2 or 3 of these are already taken, and you have to answer the 4th one. But eventually, we should be able to fill this all out and get a pretty good idea of what each of these are trying to do, and how successful they are, what their objective is, and what might be some of the drawbacks to this participatory governance procedure. If you're interested, you could poke around a little bit more on that Participedia website. It is kind of addictive to poke around and see all over the world how some groups in the grassroots sort of way are trying to come together and form environmental policy from the bottom up instead of waiting for it to come from the top down. Not all of these are environmental examples, by the way. The ones I chose for you here are, but on Participedia, there are lots of other examples that people are trying to come together to form policy for all sorts of things. So this is kind of encouraging in a way and kind of an interesting change. We've gone through the era of top-down federal management, and I think we still need that. But this idea of grassroots, bringing people together with common interests, bringing lots of people to the table who haven't had a voice before, and trying to form policy that's inclusive, It deals with environmental protection and also human rights. This is, I think, a step in the right direction. So this might be part of our solution, and we're in the solutions part of the class, so this is good. Okay, so I will let you take a look at that, find that Google Sheet on Notebook Bulletin, and see if you can add your thoughts to at least one part of it. If you have any questions, of course, email me and let me know. Next week, we're calling COVID Week 2. So you have your COVID Week 2 question comment for Sunday night. I've already posted that, so you can take a look at that. Next week, we're going to talk about economic approaches to solutions for environmental problems. And you can see the CES chapters there, 7.7, 7.12, 7.13, 2.11. And then I've also posted the Green New Deal that you've heard about. That was proposed legislation from in the last 12 or 14 months. It's a fairly short document as far as congressional documents go. I think it's 14 pages long or something like that. It's a fairly quick read, but read that also for next week, and you can also make your question or comment involving that as well. And we're going to spend some time next week talking about the Green New Deal and what that might mean. By the way, just an advertisement, as we're thinking about course registration, Dr. Fadel Kaboub, who is from the economics department, is teaching a class on the Green New Deal next fall, and you are welcome to sign up for that. I think you need 2 economic prerequisites, but the rumor is he is willing to let you take it with 1 economics course prerequisite. You could ask him if you are really interested and you're not sure, but if you've already taken a couple of econ classes and you're really into this stuff, you could take that class, and I think you'd learn a lot from it. Okay, so have a good weekend and good luck on that assignment on the Google Sheet. Have a good week.